The train rattled softly as Clara Pembroke pressed her forehead against the window, watching the mist roll over the Dorset hills. The letter lay folded in her lap, creased, worn, and still faintly scented with lavender. It was the last thing her aunt, Margaret Pembroke, had ever sent her. Within its delicate handwriting were the words that had led her here: "The house is yours now, my dear. But listen closely, for Alderwood Hollow has its own kind of song." Clara had not returned to Dorset since childhood. The memory of it was faint, a whisper of green woods and damp air, and her mother's voice singing a lullaby whose melody she could never quite forget. But now, as the taxi turned into the narrow lane leading to Alderwood Hollow, she felt a strange stirring in her chest. The village appeared like a painting left out in the rain, stone cottages covered in moss, ivy crawling over the walls, and a quietness so deep it seemed to listen back. The driver hesitated before leaving her at the old Pembroke residence. "Are you sure you'll be all right, miss?" he asked, glancing toward the edge of the woods. "They say the hollow sings when night falls." Clara smiled faintly, brushing off the unease. "It's only the wind, I imagine." The house greeted her with the scent of wood smoke and dust. Every surface seemed frozen in time, teacups still arranged neatly, an old violin case resting on a velvet chair. She ran her fingers over its surface, feeling the grooves of the wood, and when she opened it, the faint aroma of rosin filled the room. That night, after unpacking, she sat by the window and gazed into the misty forest beyond. The air was still. The clock ticked softly in the hall. Then, just before midnight, a faint melody floated through the air. It was not the wind. It was a song. Slow, mournful, and hauntingly familiar. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding as she recognized the tune. It was her mother's lullaby, note for note. The next morning, the mist hung thick over Alderwood Hollow, muffling every sound except the distant cry of crows. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she made her way down the cobbled path toward the village center. She needed answers. The villagers were polite but wary. They greeted her with cautious smiles that faded as soon as she mentioned the Pembroke name. An old woman at the bakery crossed herself and whispered, "The hollow keeps its memories, dear. Some things best left quiet." Ignoring the unease, Clara followed the narrow lane that led to the Alderwood Parish Archives, a squat stone building that smelled faintly of paper and rain. Inside, rows of dusty shelves stretched into the shadows. A young man looked up from a desk near the window, startled by her arrival. "You must be Miss Pembroke," he said, standing. "I'm Edwin Harcourt, the archivist. Word travels fast around here." Clara managed a faint smile. "Then perhaps you can tell me something about my aunt, or this place." He gestured for her to sit. "Your aunt was, well liked, in her way. She used to visit often, asking about the hollow and the old records. Said she was tracing a melody, something about the women who used to sing to the forest." Clara's eyes widened slightly. "You mean the hollow song?" Edwin nodded. "A local legend, I'm afraid. They say it began with a woman called Lydia Verne, a composer who lived here 2 centuries ago. The villagers claimed she could summon the wind with her music. One night she vanished, swallowed by the woods after her final performance. Since then, people swear her song still drifts through the trees whenever a storm is near." A shiver crawled down Clara's spine. "I heard it last night." Edwin looked at her carefully. "Then the hollow's taken an interest in you." Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the bay, though the sky above them was still pale and calm. Edwin turned toward the window, his expression clouded. "You should be careful, Miss Pembroke. The last person who tried to follow that song never came back." Clara met his gaze steadily. "Then perhaps it's time someone did." As she stepped outside, the church bell tolled once, low and hollow, as though echoing her resolve. The mist thickened again, curling around her ankles like smoke. Somewhere beyond the trees, she thought she heard it, the faint, trembling note of a violin, carried on the wind. That night, the rain returned, soft at first, then swelling into a heavy downpour that lashed the windows and rattled the shutters. Clara could not sleep. The song from the previous night haunted her mind, circling in fragments, the same rise and fall, the same aching pull that had once soothed her as a child. She rose, lit a candle, and crossed to the old violin case. When she opened it, the scent of rosin mingled with damp air. The strings, though aged, were still intact. She drew the bow across gently, and a soft note trembled into the silence. It was as though the house breathed in response. Then, from somewhere beyond the walls, she heard it again, the hollow song. Only this time, it was clearer, closer, almost calling her name. Driven by a mix of fear and fascination, Clara pulled on her cloak, took a lantern, and stepped outside. The wind tore at her hood as she made her way toward the forest. Each step sank into mud, and the air shimmered faintly with mist that glowed in the lantern light. The trees loomed like sentinels, their branches dripping with rain. As she ventured deeper, the melody grew stronger. It wound through the trunks like a living thing, sad, beautiful, and unbearably human. Suddenly, her lantern flickered. The song ceased. The woods fell utterly still. "Is anyone there?" Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. A low hum answered her, soft as a sigh. Then, from behind a gnarled oak, a shape emerged, a woman in a pale gown, her face half hidden by her hair. The light from the lantern passed through her like mist. Clara froze, her heart pounding. "Who are you?" The figure tilted her head, lips parting as if to speak. Instead, she began to hum, the same melody, the same sorrow. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, glimmered faintly like moonlit water. Then, with a sound like rushing wind, she was gone. The song faded into the trees, leaving only the drip of rain and the thundering of Clara's heart. When she returned to the house, drenched and trembling, she found muddy footprints on the floor, prints that were not her own. They led from the front door to the violin chair, and there, resting on the strings, was a single white feather. Morning came grey and breathless, as though the mist itself was reluctant to lift. Clara barely slept. The image of the spectral woman lingered in her mind, and the white feather lay on the mantel like an accusation. She found herself back at the archives by midday. Edwin looked up as she entered, his expression tightening at the sight of her pale face and wet hair. "You went into the woods, didn't you?" he said quietly. Clara nodded. "I saw her, Edwin. The woman from the legend, Lydia Verne. She was there." He rose slowly, closing the ledger in front of him. "You mustn't go near the forest again. There's a reason your aunt stopped her research. She believed Lydia's music wasn't just composed, it was bound. Every note holds a memory, every refrain a fragment of her soul." Clara stared at him. "You mean, the song is alive?" "In a manner of speaking," he said, lowering his voice. "There are records of others who heard it, musicians, wanderers, even priests. Each of them claimed the melody called them deeper into the hollow. None returned unchanged." Despite his warning, Clara felt a pull inside her chest, a strange certainty that she was meant to uncover the truth. "My mother used to sing that same tune," she whispered. How could she have known it, unless... Edwin's expression darkened. "Unless your family has been bound to the song all along." They spent the afternoon combing through faded manuscripts and brittle letters. Among them, Clara found one marked 1793 Verne Estate. It contained a single line written in delicate ink. "If the hollow ever sings again, it seeks the blood of its composer." Clara's hands trembled. "Blood of its composer," she repeated softly. "That means..." Edwin looked up sharply. "You, Clara. If Lydia Verne was your ancestor, and I believe she was, then the song has found its heir." A gust of wind slammed the window open, scattering papers across the room. The sound of distant thunder rolled through the valley. Clara stared out into the grey afternoon, her pulse hammering. Far off, beyond the roofs of Alderwood, the forest shimmered faintly beneath the stormlight. And somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, the melody rose again, soft, mournful, and impossibly beautiful. The storm raged through the night, tearing branches from trees and flinging salt spray up from the bay. Inside the old Pembroke house, Clara sat before the fire, her violin resting across her knees. The letter from 1793 lay open on the table beside her, the ink glistening faintly in the firelight. The phrase repeated in her head like a heartbeat, blood of its composer. What if Lydia's melody had never truly ended? What if each generation had carried a fragment of it, unknowingly passing it down like a curse disguised as a song? When the storm quieted near dawn, Clara rose and walked to the window. The horizon glowed a dim silver. The forest loomed dark and endless beyond the meadow. And faintly, from somewhere deep within it, she heard the violin again, clear, alive, beckoning. She could no longer resist. Clara, dressed in her traveling cloak, took the violin case, and made her way toward the woods. The ground was slick with rain, the air sharp and metallic. Each step seemed to pull her further from the waking world. As she entered the heart of the forest, she found a clearing she had never seen before. At its center stood an ancient oak, split by lightning yet still alive. Beneath its twisted roots, a faint blue glow pulsed like a heartbeat. When Clara opened her violin case, the strings quivered on their own, humming softly in harmony with the unseen melody that filled the air. She lifted the bow, and the forest exhaled. The music rose around her, swirling and wild. Each note felt like it was being drawn from her very veins. Images flashed before her eyes, Lydia Verne playing before a gathered crowd, a mob with torches, the flash of fear, betrayal, and fire. Then the forest itself seemed to shudder, echoing Lydia's last, unfinished refrain. Clara gasped, realizing she was completing it, playing the melody Lydia never could. The music grew stronger, almost unbearable, until the violin's body vibrated in her hands. Then, in the space between two notes, she heard a voice whisper, clear as glass and close to her ear. "Finish it, and free me." The bow trembled. A tear slid down her cheek as she played the final phrase. When the last note faded, the forest fell utterly silent. The blue glow beneath the oak dimmed, and a cool wind brushed her face. For a moment, she thought she saw Lydia standing before her, smiling, a fragile, grateful smile that dissolved into mist. Clara fell to her knees, breathless, clutching the violin to her chest. But as she rose, the air around her changed. The melody was gone, yet her violin felt heavier, as if something else now lived within it. The night after Edwin's confession, Clara could not sleep. The storm had calmed, but the forest whispered restlessly outside her window. The hollow song was softer that night, less mournful, almost coaxing, as if calling her by name. Unable to resist, she lit her lantern and stepped into the mist. The air was cold and heavy with pine. Each step sank into damp leaves, muffling her footsteps. She followed the faint melody that threaded between the trees like a guiding string. Her breath clouded in the air, and though the path twisted endlessly, she somehow knew where to go, as if someone led her by the hand. When she reached the heart of the forest, the song ceased. Silence descended, thick and waiting. Then she saw it, the small stone altar half buried in moss, the same one from her dream. A rusted nameplate clung to it, half eaten by time, but she could still make out the letters, Eloan Pembroke. Her own surname. A chill ran through her. Beneath the stone lay the remains of the woman who had been accused of witchcraft, the one whose music had bewitched the town centuries ago. But as Clara knelt beside the grave, her lantern flickered, and a faint figure appeared within the mist. It was the same woman from her vision, with pale hair drifting like smoke and eyes that shone like moonlight. She smiled at Clara, not with malice, but with profound sorrow. "You have my voice," the woman whispered. "And my promise." The song was never meant to curse, it was meant to protect. Clara's violin case trembled in her hands, the strings inside humming softly though untouched. The melody began again, but this time, it came from within her, notes blooming through her veins, familiar and sacred. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her shuddered. A hollow cry echoed through the forest, the trees bending inward as if bowing to an unseen force. The light around Eloan's spirit flickered violently. "You must finish it," the spirit said, her voice breaking like a cord too tightly strung. "Before they silence it again." And with that, she vanished, leaving Clara alone in the dark heart of Alderwood Hollow, the song of her blood still trembling in the cold night air. Dawn broke with a brittle, silver light that turned the forest mist into a shifting sea of grey. Clara clutched her violin tightly, every sense alert. She knew this was the moment, the culmination of centuries of music, memory, and secrets bound to her blood. Following the faint trail of glowing blue mist, she reached a clearing she had passed many times before, yet now it felt transformed. The air thrummed with energy, and the trees seemed to lean inward, listening. At the center lay the hollow itself, a natural amphitheater of roots and stone, alive with echoes of every note ever played there. Clara placed the violin on her shoulder. She could feel Lydia's presence like a whisper behind her, urging her forward. Slowly, she drew the bow across the strings. The first note rang out, pure and trembling. The hollow song began again, but this time, it carried her own soul alongside Lydia's memory. The wind answered. The trees swayed, leaves shimmering like glass. Shadows danced across the ground, not menacing, but expectant, watching her, waiting for her to finish what had been left undone. Hours seemed to pass in moments. Every phrase she played was a thread weaving together past and present, sorrow and hope. Somewhere in the distance, the echo of her mother's lullaby merged with Lydia's composition, binding them together in a tapestry of sound that rose higher and higher. Clara's arms ached, her fingers burned, but she would not stop. She played the melody through to its final note, and for a heartbeat, the forest held its breath. Then the note lingered, stretching beyond time, vibrating through roots, rocks, and wind alike. A calm settled over Alderwood Hollow. The blue glow beneath the oak faded, leaving only the warmth of sunlight breaking through the canopy. Clara lowered her bow and looked around. The hollow song had ended, yet it felt eternal, woven into the very soil and air of the forest. She smiled softly, tears running down her cheeks. Somewhere, she knew, Lydia Verne's spirit had found peace at last. The centuries of sorrow, accusation, and silence were finally released into the music, and Clara felt the weight of the family legacy ease from her heart. As she stepped back toward the village, the first birds began to sing. The hollow was quiet now, but Clara knew the song would always be there, waiting for the next hand to carry it forward, alive, unbroken, and free. Weeks passed, and Alderwood Hollow settled into a quiet rhythm. Clara returned to her family home, the violin now a part of her daily life. She could feel the weight of centuries of music and memory in her hands, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was a gift. The villagers noticed a change in her. Where once she had been a stranger, tentative and curious, now she moved with purpose, her eyes reflecting knowledge and quiet strength. People began to speak her name with respect, some even claiming to hear faint strains of the hollow song drifting from the forest during calm evenings. Clara continued her research, studying Lydia's manuscripts, discovering forgotten techniques, and learning the secrets embedded in each note. She shared her findings sparingly, knowing that some truths were too powerful to reveal carelessly. But in quiet moments, she played the hollow song at dusk, letting its melody drift across the hills, a bridge between past and present. One morning, Edwin visited. He found her on the porch, the violin resting in her lap, a smile touching her lips. "You've done it," he said softly. Clara looked at him, serene yet determined. "Not me. We did it. Lydia, my mother, and every soul who sang before us, they guided me. The song is alive because they never truly left." Edwin nodded, understanding more than words could express. "And now it will continue," he said. "Yes," Clara agreed. She rose and walked to the edge of the forest. The wind carried the faintest echo of the hollow song, like a promise whispered through the leaves. She lifted her violin and drew the bow across the strings, letting the music flow freely. For the first time, the hollow was not haunting, not sorrowful, it was alive, full of hope and memory, a living testament to courage, love, and the bonds that tied generations together. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the pulse of the forest and the heartbeat of her ancestors mingling with her own. The melody stretched into the horizon, endless and unbroken. Alderwood Hollow had its guardian now, and the legacy of the hollow song would endure, protected, cherished, and free. And somewhere in the forest, a spirit watched silently, at peace at last.